Fortune favors the bold. This sentence in the dusty pages of history is clearly embodied on the Ukrainian front when we leave behind the first week of January. Considering the situation in Ukraine as of December, it's not surprising that Zelensky's soldiers took the chance. Even Russia did not expect so much pressure from the Kiev army, but at the moment, tension and panic on the battlefield are increasing with the offensive operations developed by Ukraine. This week, we are here again with hot and breathtaking situations in the war. Let's dive right now into the areas of hot breaking points occurring on the front lines of the battlefield. Our first stop is the Donetsk front line. In Donetsk, currently one of the most complex regions in Ukraine, there have been rumors that Russian troops have withdrawn from the city of Makivka. With the loss of 400 soldiers of the Moscow army in this city, Ukraine gradually began to take control of Makivka, but the advance of the invading forces in Yakovlivka towards the southeast, towards Makivka, could change the situation here. The situation in Bakhmut, the front line where the most violent conflicts in Donetsk took place, is one of the most curious issues by everyone at the moment. The Bakhmut front line is still very active and continues to be the scene of unexpected events. On the southern side of the city, in Opytna, the Ukrainian army can be seen preparing its troops for the great battle. The intelligence that the Ukrainian forces, who want to besiege Bakhmut from Opytna and create strong fortifications there, can carry out strong attacks in this area, worries the invading Russian troops and Wagner mercenaries in the south of Bakhmut. In the northern direction of the Bakhmut front line, a very serious situation took place on January 7th. Ukrainian forces surprised the Russian soldiers in the Solidar region. Yes, we are now going to report to you one of the most interesting cases in Solidar. The Ukrainian forces advancing from Solidar towards Bakhmutska were in danger of invading troops coming towards them from Yakovlivka. Despite a ceasefire ordered by Putin, Russian forces departing from Yakovlivka came under fire from the rear of the Ukrainian forces at Solidar. With their offensive fire, the Moscow army forced the Ukrainian military group to push towards Bakhmutska. Realizing that the Russian soldiers were firing from the rear, the Ukrainian forces were stuck between the Solidar and Bakhmutska front lines. But the secret underground passages in this area became the savior of the Ukrainian soldiers. Using these passages, the Kiev forces suddenly got behind the invading soldiers in Solidar. The Ukrainian forces, advancing silently in order to get behind the Russian soldiers in this region from the underground, did not give up their precautions so that even the footsteps were not heard. Finally, the Ukrainian forces reached the end of the tunnel and backed up the frontline Russian soldiers waiting for them at Solidar. At this point, a fierce clash took place, and the invading Russian troops were quite surprised to find the Ukrainian soldiers behind them. This planned and unexpected attack of the Kiev forces was one of the most remarkable mind games since the beginning of the war. After this dramatic operation, Ukrainian forces continued to advance from Solidar to reach the Bakhmut front line, but Russian forces could not handle the fiasco on the front line between Solidar and Bakhmutska, and began to attack the Ukrainian forces again on the borderline of Solidar. The interesting thing is that this attack by Russian forces took place exactly on January 7th, that is, in the time period that included the temporary ceasefire issued by leader Vladimir Putin. It was claimed that mostly the mercenaries of the Wagner group were among the invading Russian soldiers who carried out the attack. If we consider that Moscow holds the Wagner group responsible for the city of Solidar, and that the mercenaries are concentrated in this city, we conclude that these claims are correct. But this attack, and the first skirmish near Solidar, happened at the time of the armistice. Both of these cases showed that the Wagner group did not pay much attention to Vladimir Putin's orders. In any case, the Ukrainian forces were showing much more than was expected at the moment on the Bakhmut front line. Moscow, on the other hand, was following a completely interesting policy in this process. Despite the ceasefire order of Russian leader Vladimir Putin, the attack by the Wagner group and Moscow troops against the Ukrainian forces in the Solidar region drew a great deal of reaction from the EU. The European Union administration stated that Russia is trying to buy time to recover by declaring a temporary ceasefire in the war in Ukraine due to the Orthodox Christmas. EU High Representative for Foreign Relations and Security Policy, Josep Borrell, had a telephone conversation with Ukrainian Foreign Minister Dmytro Kuleba. In the statement made by Borrell's office about the meeting, it was noted that the latest situation on the field during the war was evaluated. In the meeting, it was stated that the attacks of Russia in the last weeks contradicted the unilateral ceasefire declared, and it was stated that the only way to establish peace is by the withdrawal of Russian soldiers from Ukraine. In fact, without such concrete steps, the unilateral ceasefire was nothing more than an effort to buy Russia's time to regroup its troops, or repair its damaged international reputation. The EU was right about this until the end. According to the statement, Borrell also conveyed to Kuleba the determination of the EU to continue political, military, economic and humanitarian support to Ukraine. During the meeting, it was reported that the preparations for the EU foreign ministers meeting to be held on January 23rd, and where Kuleba will attend via video conference, and the EU-Ukraine summit to be held on February 3rd, were also evaluated. President Vladimir Putin had instructed the Russian Ministry of Defense to implement a 36-hour ceasefire in Ukraine from 12 o'clock on January 6th onwards. But that decision was violated in Solidar. In the statement made by the Kremlin, it was said that the ceasefire decision was taken to allow Orthodox people to participate in religious ceremonies during Christmas, and called for a ceasefire on the Ukrainian side. The Kiev authorities, on the other hand, seem to have foreseen the attacks by the Wagner Group in Solidar and the failure to comply with the ceasefire decision. Kuleba had underlined that before the attacks by the Wagner Group, Russia had not stopped attacking civilian targets since the beginning of the war. Considering the victories of the Ukrainian forces in recent weeks, the thoughts of the Ukrainian leader make quite a lot of sense. Ukrainian President Volodymyr Zelensky evaluated the ceasefire decision of Russia as a move to prevent the advance of the Ukrainian army in Donbass. Against this attitude of Ukraine, a response came from Russia. The Russian Ministry of Defense has announced that the Russian army will continue to comply with the ceasefire announced for the Orthodox Christmas, despite the opposition of Ukraine. Was Russia afraid of this advance of Ukraine? While all this turmoil on the battlefield continued, news came that the largest ever military aid package from the United States to Ukraine would be announced. Speaking at the daily press briefing, White House spokesman Karine Jean-Pierre reported that during the day, the Ministry of Defense will announce the largest ever military aid package for the war in Ukraine. Jean-Pierre stated that Ukraine will be given $2.85 billion in military aid package support from the US's own inventory, and that the package will provide $682 million of aid to the allies on the eastern flank of NATO and $225 million to ensure the long-term capacity and modernization of the Ukrainian army. She also stated that it would include foreign military financing. Stating that the war between Russia and Ukraine is at a critical stage, Jean-Pierre underlined that the USA will continue to support Ukraine in this context. Jean-Pierre was quite right. At the moment, the war has reached such a critical point that both sides have to think about their moves almost 10 times, because any small mistake to be made at this time can completely change the course of the war. The current situation on the front lines of Ukraine is very good. If the Kiev army manages to maintain this situation, it will not be easy for Russia to prolong this war. In addition, if the Ukrainian forces continue this incredible performance, presumably the Moscow army will withdraw completely from the occupied territories. The reason is that, yes, Russia's ammunition reserve has already started to sound red alert. Thank you for watching us.